Today's reflection is based on Matthew 11 and what's been going on there. John the Baptist had come to prepare the way for Jesus, and John had drawn people out into the desert, and he had been baptising people as a way of preparing for the coming of Jesus. But by now John was actually in prison because he said something about Herod's wife that Herod's wife didn't like, and so she'd had him put into prison. And so John's now sitting in prison and wondering, has he been right all along? And so he sent some of his disciples to Jesus to ask him, are you the Messiah? Are you the one we've been waiting for? And Jesus' answer to him was, just go back to John and tell him what you've seen. You've seen the blind people able to see, you've seen the lame people walk, you've seen lepers who are cleansed, you've seen the deaf hear, you've seen the dead raised to life, you've heard the good news preached to the poor. Just go and tell him. Surely that would speak for itself about Jesus being the Son of God. But then Jesus began to talk to the crowd, and he said, look, John was the one who came to prepare the way for the coming Messiah. He is the greatest of prophets that have been. And yet, you just looked at him and said, well, he's a bit of a weirdo. He's living out in the desert, he's wearing animal skins, he's eating bush tucker. You know, he's a bit of a weirdo. And so many of them just disregarded his message because of, well, who he was. And he said, but then Jesus came, and Jesus mixed with everybody. Even the people that the leaders thought were just, beyond the pale sort of thing. They were just such dreadful sinners they shouldn't be mixed with. And Jesus was mixing with them. And so they accused him of being a drunkard and a glutton. Now, that is okay, that's disparaging of his character, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. In Deuteronomy 21, there's a passage which talks about a stubborn and rebellious son, and says, if he refuses to obey his parents, then they are to take him to the elders at the gate, and they're to say, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey us, he's a profligate and a drunkard. Then all the men of the town are to stone him to death. You must purge him from among you. You must purge this evil from among you. So what they're really saying about Jesus was, this guy is evil. He's trouble. He needs to be got rid of. So these people were rejecting the prophet of God, the greatest of the prophets, and the Son of God. They couldn't see the truth that was right under their nose. And this is what we tend to do. And we hear a message that perhaps challenges us a bit. We don't like it because we don't really want to do anything about it. We will turn and criticise the person who brings the message. Oh, they're just so-and-so, or they're uneducated, or they're whatever. And we sometimes hear people say, look, if I were alive in Jesus' time, then it would be much easier to believe. Not so. The people of Jesus' day saw his miracles, heard his teaching, and yet so many of them still would not believe. There's a little section in there that says the city of Sodom is going to be better off on the day of judgment than Capernaum. Now, Sodom had been destroyed in the time of Abraham, and it was known for being destroyed because of its absolute wickedness that was there. Whereas Capernaum was where Jesus was carrying out his ministry. And so the people of Capernaum had seen Jesus heal people and drive out evil spirits from people. They'd heard his teaching, and still they rejected him. And so Jesus was saying, look, on the day of judgment, the people of that wicked city, Sodom, are going to be better off because they haven't had the opportunity that the people of Capernaum have had, and yet still have not believed. So who is it who believed? It generally was what we call the little people. Not the leaders, not the wealthy, but basically the little people. Because they heard good news. Now in those days, if you were basically a nobody, then you were under great burden, you worked hard, you lived in poverty. If you were part of the ruling class, you got very wealthy and got great status. And so it was the poor who were hearing the message of Jesus, the message of hope, the message of healing. Okay, and Jesus goes on to say, now, come to me if you're weary and burdened, and says, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. and I will give you rest. See, the people under Jewish rulers, under the Jewish religious rulers, were burdened down by lots of stupid little rules and regulations that the leaders put upon them. And it was just burdensome. It was religion, it wasn't faith. And this is what Jesus was speaking against. Anything that puts rules and regulations, you must do this, you must do that, is religion. It's not what Jesus is after. What Jesus is saying, I want you to be yoked to me. Now, to be yoked, it's a picture of an animal in the field, and animals who are working are yoked together, and they might be pulling a plough or whatever. What they would do in those days was they would train a young ox by yoking it to an experienced one, and the young one would then have to go where the experienced one went because the yoke was sort of guiding them that way. Now what Jesus is saying is, I want you to wear my yoke. So instead of being burdened down by rules and regulations, you must do this, you mustn't do that, wear my yoke. Let me lead you, let me guide you. You're still going to be working, because an animal with a yoke on is a working animal. You're still going to be working, but it's not a burdensome yoke. It's a light one. And if you're working with me, you're going to find a real peace for your soul, a purpose in your life. He's not promising an easy way of life. He's not promising that tough times will never happen. He's promising a life where the soul is not burdened down. We have a sense of contentment, even in the hard times. We have a hope that lifts us out of ourselves and lifts us out of our self-absorption. John 5:19, Jesus says, he can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. And that's the sort of connection that Jesus wants with us, that we will only do the things that we see him doing. But to be able to do that, we need to have a close relationship with him so we know what it is that Jesus is doing at any one time. And that's what he's asking of us as his followers. Be yoked to Jesus. Let him lead. We should not feel burdened, instead inspired.